The warning klaxon had been screaming for 3 minutes when Marcus Webb realized he was going to die alone in the dark between stars. His survey ship, the cartographer, tumbled through space like a leaf caught in rapids. The fusion core had taken a micrometeorite hit during what should have been a routine mapping sweep of the frontier zone, that vast stretch of uncharted territory beyond the edge of human colonial space. Now the core was bleeding plasma into the coolant system, and every backup had failed in cascade. Marcus had managed to seal himself into the command module before the main hull decompressed, but that only bought him time. 6 hours of oxygen, maybe 7 if he slowed his breathing. No power for the FTL drive. No way to repair the damage. His distress beacon was broadcasting, but he was 8 light-years from the nearest human outpost. Marcus was 28 years old. He had been surveying asteroid fields for the Earth Colonial Expansion Bureau for 4 years. It was lonely work, but he had always found peace in the silence of deep space, in the careful precision of mapping gravitational eddies and mineral deposits. Now that silence felt like a tomb. He recorded a message for his sister, then one for his parents. Then he sat in the dim emergency lighting and watched his oxygen counter tick down. 5 hours and 12 minutes later, proximity alarms jolted him from a light doze. Something was approaching. Marcus pulled himself to the viewport, hope and fear warring in his chest. Pirates existed out here, and salvagers who asked no questions about how ships ended up derelict. The vessel that slid into view was small, perhaps a third the size of his survey ship. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates, welds visible even from a distance. Scorch marks and dents told stories of hard use and harder living. But it was moving under power and it was coming toward him. A communication request pinged his console. Marcus accepted it, and his screen filled with a face that made him freeze. Large eyes, dark and reflective, set in a face covered with fine gray fur. Small nose, delicate features, pointed ears that swiveled slightly as the being studied him through the camera. The alien was small, Marcus realized, probably no taller than a human child. Its species wore simple utilitarian clothing, a dark jumpsuit patched in several places. The alien spoke, sounds that Marcus's translator struggled to parse. The software had limited database coverage out here in uncharted space. After a moment, text appeared on his screen in broken English. "You damaged, need help," Marcus nearly laughed. Yes, he needed help. The alien's name, as best as the translator could manage, was Kael. His species called themselves something the software rendered as Venith, though Marcus suspected that was an approximation at best. Over the next hour, working through the halting translator and hand gestures visible over video, they established a plan. Kael couldn't repair the fusion core. Nobody could, not without a shipyard. But Kael could rig a tow system using magnetic grapples and tractor beam emitters salvaged from a dozen different technologies. It would be slow, but Kael knew of a border station 3 systems away, a neutral trading post where species from a dozen governments came to do business beyond official oversight. What struck Marcus most was that Kael never hesitated. The Venith's small ship was clearly operating on minimal resources. Marcus could see patches on patches through Kael's video feed, systems jury-rigged and cobbled together. This was someone living on the edge themselves. Yet when Marcus tried to discuss payment, tried to promise compensation, Kael simply shook his head and said, through the struggling translator, "You need help. I help." Kael suited up and EVA'd across to the cartographer. Marcus watched through exterior cameras as the small figure moved with practiced efficiency, attaching magnetic clamps to his ship's hull. The Venith worked in an old-style pressure suit that had been modified extensively, patches and additions making it barely recognizable from whatever original design it had started with. Then came the hardest part. Kael's ship had oxygen, but not enough for 2 beings for the journey ahead. They would have to share what they had. Kael transferred emergency atmosphere canisters from his ship to Marcus's command module, precious reserves that might mean the difference between life and death for the Venith if something went wrong. When Marcus protested, Kael's large eyes met his through their respective viewports. The translator garbled whatever he said, but the gesture was clear. We share, or we both die. Better to share. For 14 hours, Kael's small ship dragged the cartographer through space at sublight speeds. It was agonizingly slow, the kind of journey that would take an FTL-capable ship mere minutes. But Kael's ship was operating at the edge of its capacity, and the cartographer was dead weight. They talked during that time, awkward conversations through the improving translator as the software learned Kael's language. Marcus learned that the Venith were scavengers, living in nomadic fleets that traveled through the spaces between civilizations. They salvaged derelict ships, abandoned stations, debris fields from ancient battles. What they found, they repaired, traded, or broke down for parts. It was a hard life, Kael admitted, but it was freedom. When Marcus asked why Kael had come to help, why he had risked his resources and time for a stranger, Kael seemed confused by the question. "You were in trouble," he said simply. "You would have died. I could help, so I help. Is this not what people do?" Marcus thought about all the human ships that might have passed by an alien distress call, worried about pirates or contamination, or simply unwilling to delay their schedules. He wanted to say yes, this was what people did. He couldn't quite bring himself to believe it. The border station was called Crossroads, a rotating wheel of habitats and docking bays that had grown organically over decades. Ships from a dozen species clustered around it like moths around a flame. Kael brought the cartographer into a dock reserved for salvage operations, then refused to come inside the station itself. Marcus was still weak from the ordeal, but he insisted on meeting Kael face-to-face before the Venith left. They stood in the docking bay, and Marcus was struck by how small Kael was, barely reaching his chest. The Venith's fur was a soft gray that darkened to charcoal at the tips of his ears and tail. His eyes, so large in his delicate face, reflected the station lights. "I need to pay you," Marcus said. "I need to report this, get you proper salvage fees, compensation." Kael held up a small hand. "No need, you are safe, that is enough." "It's not enough. You saved my life, you used your own supplies, your own fuel. And I would do again," Kael said quietly. His English was better now, the translator having learned his patterns. "Payment makes it transaction. This was not transaction, this was," he searched for the word, "right thing." Before Marcus could argue further, Kael had bowed slightly and returned to his ship. The docking clamps released, and the patched-together vessel pulled away from Crossroads Station. Marcus stood in the viewing gallery and watched it go, feeling a strange hollowness in his chest. He didn't even have Kael's full name, didn't know how to find him again, didn't know anything except that a member of a species he had never heard of had saved his life and asked for nothing in return. Marcus filed his reports. He told the story of his rescue to the Earth Colonial Expansion Bureau, to the insurance investigators, to anyone who would listen. He tried to track down information about the Venith, but found almost nothing in human databases. They were barely a footnote in galactic affairs, mentioned only as scavengers and junk traders who kept to themselves. For years, Marcus tried to find Kael. He posted bounties, hired trackers, sent messages to every Venith fleet that human merchants encountered. He never got an answer. The Venith, it seemed, did not keep centralized records. They were nomads, and Kael was one among millions, drifting through the dark spaces between stars. Eventually, life moved on. Marcus continued his career with the Bureau. He rose through the ranks, his experience and the minor fame from his survival story opening doors. He married, had children, watched them grow up on Mars colony. The memory of those 14 hours being towed through space faded from immediate consciousness, settling into the background of his mind like an old scar that only ached in certain weather. But he never forgot the small being with the large eyes who had shared his last reserves to save a stranger. He never forgot the question that still had no good answer. Is this not what people do? 50 years passed. Admiral Marcus Webb was 78 years old when he took his seat in the Galactic Council chamber on Unity Station. His hair had gone white, his face was lined with decades of command decisions, but his eyes were still sharp. Earth's position on the Council was relatively new, humanity having achieved the necessary criteria for membership only 15 years earlier. The major powers still viewed humans as upstarts, too aggressive, too emotional, too willing to break protocol. Marcus had learned to navigate those prejudices, to pick his battles, to know when to speak and when to listen. Today's session was supposed to be routine. Administrative matters, trade disputes, the usual bureaucratic machinery of an interstellar government. Marcus reviewed the agenda on his tablet, noting nothing particularly controversial. Then the Torvan hegemony requested an emergency addition to the schedule. The motion was titled Resolution of the Venith Problem. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard the name Venith only a handful of times in the last 50 years, always in passing, always in contexts that suggested they were considered little more than vermin by the major species. He pulled up the full text of the motion on his screen. The Torvan representative, Ambassador Threnix, stood to present the case. The Torvan were a tall species, humanoid in general shape, but with chitinous plates covering their bodies and faces that resembled stylized masks. Threnix's voice resonated through the translation system with artificial calm. Esteemed council members, we bring forth a matter that has troubled our borders for generations. The Venith, a nomadic species numbering approximately 40 million individuals, have long operated in the spaces between our territories. They describe themselves as salvagers, but in practice, they are thieves. Holographic displays illuminated above the council floor, showing Venith ships near derelict stations in debris fields clustered around abandoned structures. Marcus recognized the patchwork hulls, the mismatched components. His hands tightened on his armrests. The Venith take what is not theirs, Threnix continued. Ships that are damaged but not abandoned. Resources from debris fields that rightfully belong to whoever lost them. Technology from stations that were merely unoccupied, not ownerless. They are, in essence, parasites feeding on the losses of civilized species. The Salthais Collective added their testimony. The Rix Federation presented evidence of Venith fleets lingering near trade routes. The Ilthari sovereignty complained about unregulated salvage operations in their territory. One by one, the major powers built their case. The proposed resolution was clinical in its language. The Venith would be relocated to designated zones, 3 barren moons in systems far from major trade routes. They would be permitted to maintain their ships but would be prohibited from leaving these zones without explicit council permission. Resources would be provided for their sustenance. Marcus read between the lines with the ease of long practice. The 3 moons listed were airless rocks with no mineral wealth, no strategic value, nothing to salvage. The Venith lived by salvage. Put them on barren moons with no resources, and they would die. Not immediately, not violently, but through slow starvation and resource depletion. The council was voting to relocate an entire species to death camps and calling it administrative necessity. We understand this seems harsh, Threnix said, his voice carrying false sympathy. But the Venith have repeatedly refused to integrate into civilized society. They maintain no permanent settlements, respect no territorial boundaries, acknowledge no government authority. They are a problem that can no longer be ignored. This resolution offers them a chance at stability, at peaceful existence in designated areas. It is more generous than they deserve. The vote was scheduled for the end of the session, 3 hours away. Marcus requested copies of all documentation, every piece of evidence presented. He retired to Earth's delegation office and began reading. The files included images of Venith ships. Marcus found himself staring at a photograph of a small vessel, its hull covered in mismatched plates, welds visible where different technologies had been joined together. It could have been Kael's ship. It could have been any of them. He opened his personal files, searching through decades of archived reports. There, dated 2187, was his own incident report from the cartographer disaster. He had included every detail he could remember about his rescue, about Kael, about the 14 hours of being towed to safety by someone who had no reason to help except that it was, in Kael's words, the right thing. Marcus opened a secure channel to Earth. The Secretary General's office connected him within minutes. President Dominic Reeves appeared on the screen, a man in his 50s with the careful expression of someone who had learned that every word could become public. Admiral Webb. I assume this is about the Venith resolution. You've read it. Our analysts flagged it as potential controversy. The major powers don't often propose species-wide relocations. It makes everyone nervous. Reeves paused. I'm told the vote is expected to be unanimous or close to it. No one wants to anger the Torvan hegemony over a species that has no political value. They saved my life, Marcus said quietly. 50 years ago, when my ship was dying in deep space, one of them saved my life. He used his own supplies, risked his own safety, and asked for nothing in return. Reeves's expression softened. Marcus, I remember the story. Everyone does. It's part of your legend. But that was one Venith, and this is galactic politics. We oppose this resolution. We damage our relationship with 5 major powers over a species that has no strategic importance, no resources we need, no political leverage. I'm sorry, but I need you to abstain on this vote. They're going to die, Marcus said. Those moons are death sentences. The Venith can't survive without salvage operations. This isn't relocation, it's genocide with paperwork. That's a strong accusation. It's an accurate one, Reeves sighed. I'll discuss it with the cabinet. But Marcus, you need to understand the reality here. Earth has been on the Council for 15 years. We're still proving ourselves, still building relationships. We can't afford to be seen as troublemakers who oppose reasonable administrative solutions because of sentimental attachments. The connection ended. Marcus sat in the silence of his office, surrounded by the documentation of bureaucratic extinction. He thought about Kael's large eyes, the careful way he had worked to save a stranger. He thought about the question that had haunted him for 50 years. Is this not what people do? Apparently not. Apparently civilized people watched species die and called it administrative necessity. 3 hours later, Marcus Webb stood in the council chamber as the vote was called. One by one, the member species registered their positions. Yes, yes. Abstain. Yes, yes. The tally mounted with mechanical inevitability. 47 species on the council, and not one was willing to stand against the major powers. Earth, the council moderator called. Marcus looked at the faces around the chamber, at the representatives of species that had learned to mind their own business, to not make waves, to understand that some beings mattered and others did not. He thought about the message he would have to send to Reeves, the reprimand he would receive, possibly the end of his career. Then he thought about Kael, somewhere out there in the dark between stars, still salvaging, still surviving, still believing that helping people in trouble was simply what people did. Marcus stood. Humanity votes no, and we move to strike this resolution entirely. The chamber erupted. The moderator called for order while representatives shouted objections, questions, demands for explanation. Marcus waited for the noise to die down, then activated his speaking privileges. 50 years ago, he began, his voice steady, I was dying in deep space. My ship had been damaged beyond repair and I was hours from death. A Venith salvager named Kael found me. His ship was barely functional, held together with spare parts and determination. His supplies were minimal. He had every reason to leave me, to protect his own resources, to mind his own business. He pulled up the image of his damaged ship being towed, the small Venith vessel straining with the effort. Instead, Kael shared his oxygen. He shared his food and water. He spent 14 hours towing me to safety at great risk to himself. When I tried to pay him, to compensate him for his losses, he refused. He said helping someone in trouble was simply the right thing to do. Marcus looked directly at Threnix. You call the Venith thieves because they salvage derelict ships, but who else salvages them? Which of our species sends ships to recover the abandoned, to repair the broken, to find value in what others discard? The Venith fill a role that our civilized species find beneath us. They are the custodians of our failures, and we repay them by calling them criminals. This resolution calls them parasites and proposes to relocate them to barren moons with no resources. Let us be honest about what this is. Those moons are graves. We are voting to kill 40 million beings because they are inconvenient, because they live differently than we do, because they take what we have already abandoned and somehow that offends our sense of ownership. He paused, letting the words settle. One Venith saved my life and asked for nothing. The least I can do is cast one vote in return. Earth stands against this resolution, and we call upon this council to recognize it for what it is: fear and prejudice dressed in administrative language. The vote proceeded despite his objection. The final tally was 46 in favor, 1 against. The resolution passed. Marcus was recalled to Earth the next day. He expected censure, possibly removal from his position. Instead, he arrived home to find his speech had been broadcast across human space, had been shared billions of times, had ignited something fierce and immediate in the human consciousness. People wanted to know more about Kael. They wanted to know more about the Venith. They wanted to see images of the beings who helped a lost human 50 years ago, who apparently still operated with that same philosophy of mutual aid, even as the galaxy viewed them as vermin. News networks interviewed xenoanthropologists who explained Venith culture, the fleet families, the sharing of resources, the ethic of helping those in need because anyone could be in need tomorrow in the harsh environment of space. They were a species built on mutual survival, and they extended that ethic even to strangers from unknown species. Social media exploded with a single phrase that captured the human response: "We owe them." President Reeves called Marcus to a meeting in Geneva. Marcus expected a reprimand. Instead, he found himself in a room with the Secretary General, the heads of all major Earth militaries, and representatives from colonies across human space. Reeves spoke first. "Admiral, your speech has created a situation. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in favor of supporting the Venith. We've received petitions with billions of signatures demanding action. Colonial governments are passing resolutions. Our own military personnel are asking why we're not protecting the species that protected one of ours." General Patricia Hammond, head of Earth Naval Forces, leaned forward. "The Council resolution gives us a problem and an opportunity. The Venith are supposed to be relocated within 6 months. The major powers will enforce this through military action if necessary, but they can't enforce it if the Venith are under another species' protection." "You want to offer them asylum," Marcus said. "More than that," Reeves replied. "We want to offer them full integration into human space, territory access, salvage rights, protection under Earth's military umbrella. The legal framework is complex, but our attorneys believe we can make it work. The question is whether you think they'll accept." Marcus thought about Kael, about the fierce independence of a species that had survived for millennia on the margins of civilized space. "They won't want charity, they'll want dignity." "Then we offer them partnership," Hammond said. "We need salvage operations anyway, especially as we expand into new territories. The Venith have expertise we lack. We frame this as mutual benefit, not rescue." Over the following weeks, Operation Remember Det took shape. It was the largest mobilization of human resources since the colony wars of the previous century, but this time the mobilization was for protection, not conquest. Naval vessels deployed to known Venith fleet locations, broadcasting messages of asylum and protection. Civilian ships were retrofitted as supply vessels and sent to provide resources to Venith communities. Human legal teams began the complex work of claiming abandoned debris fields and derelict stations throughout human space, then issuing salvage permits to Venith operators. The cleverness of the legal strategy became apparent quickly. If humanity owned the derelicts, the debris fields, the abandoned structures, then Venith salvagers working with permits weren't stealing anything. They were licensed contractors. The major powers had no grounds for complaint without admitting they still wanted property they had already abandoned. But the real test came in the Kes sector, a border region where a Venith fleet of 40 ships had been conducting salvage operations for decades. The Torvan hegemony sent a task force of 12 warships to enforce the relocation order. They arrived to find 3 human destroyers already positioned around the Venith fleet. The Torvan commander, Captain Vrilax, sent a terse message to the human ships: "You are interfering with a council resolution. Withdraw immediately." Commander Jackson Hale, leading the human flotilla, responded with equal brevity: "These beings are under Earth's protection. If you wish to enforce your resolution, you will have to go through us." The standoff lasted 6 days. Torvan reinforcements arrived, bringing their total to 18 warships. Human reinforcements arrived as well, but more significantly, Admiral Marcus Webb arrived aboard the dreadnought Persistence, leading a battle group that included 2 carriers and a dozen escort vessels. Marcus broadcast on all frequencies, making sure the message reached not just the Torvan but every species watching. The Galactic Council voted to relocate the Venith. Earth voted against that resolution. We will not enforce it, and we will actively oppose any attempts to enforce it through violence. The Venith are under our protection. You may proceed with your relocation if you wish, but you will have to go through us to do it. The Torvan had not expected this level of commitment. Neither had anyone else. Humanity was still a relatively new council member, still building its reputation. No one had predicted they would risk war with major powers over a species of scavengers. But Marcus understood something the other species had missed. Humans were persistent. Humans held grudges and remembered debts, and humans had a particular fury reserved for bullies who picked on the defenseless. The Torvan task force withdrew. Similar confrontations occurred across a dozen sectors. Every time, human ships positioned themselves between Venith fleets and the forces sent to relocate them. Every time, humanity made it clear that enforcing the resolution meant war. And every time, the major powers chose to back down rather than fight. The Galactic Council entered a state of paralyzed outrage. They had passed a resolution, and one member species was simply refusing to acknowledge it. But none of them wanted to be the one to start a war over the Venith question, especially when humanity had made it clear they were willing to fight. While the military handled protection, a civilian effort unfolded across human space. Marcus had spent 50 years trying to find Kael. Now millions of humans joined that search. Volunteers visited Venith fleets in human ships, showing photos of Marcus from 50 years ago, playing recordings of his council testimony. The Venith were initially wary, unused to positive attention from other species. But the humans were persistent, and their story was compelling. It took 8 months, but eventually a message arrived. An elderly Venith had come forward from a fleet operating near the Deneb sector. His name was Kael. He remembered rescuing a human in the frontier zone decades ago. He had no idea what had become of that human, but he hoped the man had survived. Marcus was on Unity Station when he received the message. His hands shook as he read it. After 50 years, after searching across half the galaxy, the being who had saved his life was coming forward because the species that human had represented was now searching for him. They arranged to meet on Crossroads Station, the same border facility where Kael had delivered Marcus half a century earlier. Marcus arrived aboard the Persistence, but he made the final approach in a small shuttle, keeping the symbolism intimate rather than overwhelming. Kael was 71 years old now. His gray fur had silvered, and he moved with the careful deliberation of age. But his eyes were the same, large and dark and kind. He stood in the same docking bay where they had said goodbye 50 years earlier, surrounded by humans who had come to witness the reunion. Marcus climbed down from the shuttle and walked across the bay. He was aware of the cameras, of the billions of people watching across human space, but in that moment, all of it faded to background noise. "Kael," he said, "I've been looking for you for 50 years. The Venith's translator rendered his response with mechanical precision, but Marcus could hear the confusion in his voice. "I do not understand. I only helped one person. Why would your whole species care?" Marcus found himself smiling, though his eyes were wet. "Because we're human. One of us is all of us. You saved my life when you had no reason to, when it cost you resources you could barely spare. You asked for nothing. You didn't even want thanks. But we're a species with long memories, Kael. We don't forget debts, and we don't abandon those who showed us mercy." Kael looked around at the assembled humans, at the ships visible through the bay windows, at the evidence of massive mobilization on behalf of his people. "This is too much. It was such a small thing." "To you, maybe," Marcus said. "To me, it was my life. And to humanity, it became proof that kindness exists even in the dark between stars. You asked me once if helping people in trouble wasn't just what people do. I couldn't answer you then, but I can now. It's what people should do, it's what you do, and we're going to make damn sure you can keep doing it." The reunion was broadcast across human space. It was watched by billions, and there was not a dry eye among them. The image of Marcus and Kael, old now, meeting again after half a century, became iconic. It crystallized everything humanity felt about the situation: gratitude, responsibility, and a fierce determination that those who showed mercy would never face extinction for it. Over the following year, nearly 8 million Venith accepted Earth's asylum offer. They did not settle on planets. They were spaceborne and space-adapted, uncomfortable with gravity and open skies. Instead, they integrated into human space operations. Their salvage expertise proved invaluable to human expansion efforts. What humans saw as junk, Venith saw as potential. Their ability to repair and repurpose damaged technology saved human colonies billions in replacement costs. The remaining 32 million Venith continued their nomadic existence, but now they operated with human protection and legal salvage permits. They were no longer criminals in the eyes of the galaxy. They were licensed contractors working in partnership with humanity. The major powers on the Galactic Council remained furious, but they were stalemated. Enforcing the resolution meant war with humanity, and none of them wanted that. The humans had proven themselves willing to fight, willing to die if necessary, to protect beings they had decided were under their care. Eventually, 18 months after the resolution had passed, the Council quietly shelved it. The official language spoke of changing circumstances and need for further study, but everyone understood what had happened. One species had said no, had meant it, and had made the cost of enforcement too high. The Venith remained free. Marcus Webb retired at 80, after ensuring that protection protocols for the Venith were enshrined in human law and military doctrine. He had spent the last years of his career as Earth's most effective ambassador, not because of diplomatic skill but because of moral clarity. He had shown the galaxy what humanity valued, and that was worth more than 1,000 treaties. Kael, despite being offered comfort and honor, returned to his salvage ship. But he no longer worked alone. A crew of young humans had requested assignment with him, wanting to learn from the one who started it all. Kael found them loud and sometimes reckless, but their enthusiasm was infectious. They treated salvage not as mere recycling but as archaeology, finding stories in the debris fields, honoring the lost ships they recovered. On Earth's orbital Station 1, the largest human structure in space, a statue was erected in the central plaza. It depicted two figures, a human in a damaged spacesuit reaching out to a smaller being in a patched pressure suit. The human was Marcus at 28. The Venith was Kael at 21. Between their reaching hands, a small sphere floated, representing both Earth and the life that had been saved. The plaque beneath read, "One act of mercy, one species' memory. May we never forget what we owe." Children visited the statue on school trips and asked their teachers about the Venith, about the rescue, about why humanity had mobilized its fleets for beings most of the galaxy considered insignificant. The answers varied, but they always included the same core truth. Because kindness matters, because debts must be paid, because the measure of a civilization is not its power but its mercy. In the Deneb sector, an old Venith salvager named Kael worked a debris field with his human crew, recovering useful materials from ships that had been abandoned decades earlier. The work was familiar, comfortable, the same as he had done for 70 years. But now he did it without fear, without the constant threat of warships arriving to chase him away. His translator crackled with a question from one of the young humans. "Kael, did you ever imagine this would happen? That helping one person would change everything?" Kael paused in his examination of a damaged hull plate. He thought about that day 50 years ago when he had found a human dying in space, about the simple calculation that had driven his decision. Someone needed help, and he could provide it. It had not been heroism. It had been the only choice that made sense. "No," he said finally. "I only knew that he would die if I did nothing. The rest." He gestured at the human ships visible in the distance, at the new reality they represented. "The rest is what humans do. They remember." And across human space, billions of people did exactly that. They remembered the small being who had shared his last reserves to save a stranger. They remembered the question that had started it all. Is this not what people do? And they had answered with ships and laws and determination that yes, this was exactly what people should do. One act of mercy, 50 years ago in the dark between stars, had changed the galaxy. Not because it was exceptional, but because someone had been watching, someone had remembered, and someone had decided that debts like that could never be allowed to go unpaid. In the end, that was what made humanity human. Not their technology, not their military might, not their expansion across the stars. It was their stubborn, irrational, beautiful insistence that kindness mattered, that debts must be honored, and that those who showed mercy deserved mercy in return. Kael worked his salvage operation and remembered the confused human he had towed to safety. Marcus Webb lived out his retirement and remembered the being with large eyes who had saved him. And humanity remembered both of them, holding their story close as a reminder of who they wanted to be. One act, one species, one debt repaid across 50 years and 10,000 light years. The galaxy would never be quite the same.